Father shoved me past the glass door, labeling me worthless. I grinned as crimson ran down my face. "You forfeited all," I uttered. That night, I revealed to the masses who truly held their empire, and by morning, their flawless existence had utterly collapsed. Do you know what it feels like to have your own father look you in the eyes, call you worthless, and then shove you so hard you crash through a glass door? That night, as I lay bleeding on the marble floor, a strange calm washed over me. I looked up at him, smiling, and whispered, "You just lost everything." And I meant it. What happened next would dismantle their perfect empire, brick by painful brick. My story didn't begin with shattered glass, though. It started in the kind of privilege most people only dream of. I'm Audrey Lancaster, and I grew up in a sprawling estate overlooking the Pacific. My dad, Harold, was the CEO of Lancaster Technologies, a company my grandfather, William, built from nothing, from his garage 40 years ago. My earliest memories aren't about fancy toys or designer clothes. They're of sitting on my grandfather's knee. "Audrey," he'd say, his eyes crinkling, "one day, all of this will be yours to protect. Business is about more than profit, it's about purpose." My mother, Grace, was the heart of our family. She taught me that privilege came with responsibility. Every Christmas, she'd take me to deliver gifts to children in hospitals. "Look them in the eyes," she'd insist. "Everyone deserves dignity." Everything changed when I turned 12. Mom was diagnosed with aggressive pancreatic cancer. 3 months later, she was gone. Just like that. My world crumbled. My dad? He retreated into his work, leaving me to grieve alone. I'd sneak into her closet, just breathing in the fading scent of her perfume, desperately trying to remember the sound of her laugh. Then came Stephanie. Barely 11 months after Mom's funeral, Dad introduced me to his new girlfriend. 6 weeks later, they were married. She was 20 years younger than him, with perfectly manicured nails that dug into my shoulder when she hugged me for photos. "We are going to be such good friends," she cooed, her smile plastered on for the cameras. 2 days later, her son, Douglas, moved in. He was 17, handsome, and immediately became the sole focus of my father's attention. What started as showing him the ropes quickly morphed into grooming him as the heir apparent. I was suddenly relegated to the background, a forgotten shadow in our own family photos. It hurt, deeply, but I refused to be a shadow. I excelled. I graduated high school as valedictorian, earned my business degree from Stanford with highest honors, and completed my MBA by 23. While Douglas barely scraped through a local university, I was developing patents that would become cornerstone products for Lancaster Technologies. My grandfather, even before his death when I was 18, had always seen something in me. He'd sneak me into board meetings. "Watch how they negotiate," he'd whisper. "Notice who speaks and who listens." Board members would smile at William's little shadow, never realizing I was absorbing everything. One of them, Victor Chan, became my mentor after Grandpa passed. When I finished my MBA, Victor helped me get a position at a competing firm. "Your father needs to see your value from the outside," he explained over coffee. Sometimes family can't recognize the talent right in front of them. For 4 years, I built my reputation, separate from the Lancaster name. Trade journals featured my innovations. Competitors tried to poach me. All while Douglas was given increasing authority at Lancaster, despite a string of failed product launches. Eleanor Wright, my grandfather's former assistant, still at the company, would call me with updates. "Your father approved another $3 million for Douglas's pet project today," she'd sigh. The board is nervous, but no one challenges Harold directly. When I turned 27, I decided it was time to come home. Lancaster Technologies was floundering, innovation flatlining. My father reluctantly offered me a position, special projects manager, with no team and a tiny office in the basement. "Be grateful," he said, as if it was a gift. "Most people would kill for a foot in the door here." He had no idea I'd spent years preparing for this exact moment. I'd studied every aspect of the business. I understood our products better than anyone except maybe my grandfather. And, most importantly, I suspected something was very, very wrong with the company finances. I accepted with a smile. "Thank you for the opportunity, Dad, I said, watching his surprise. I won't disappoint you. It was the last promise I'd keep to him. My first 6 months back were a masterclass in corporate politics. I kept my head down, worked longer hours than anyone, systematically learning every current operation. My basement office became my command center, walls covered with timelines, market analysis, organizational charts. If people thought I was just trying to prove myself, all the better. Our cardiovascular device division was really struggling. Sales had dropped 30% in 2 years, a major hospital chain threatening to switch competitors. I spent weekends studying patient outcomes, talking to doctors, reviewing competitor products. The problem became clear. Our devices were reliable, but hadn't evolved with new surgical techniques. I developed a prototype for a modified device, perfect for minimally invasive procedures. After testing, I presented it to the division head. He was impressed enough to allocate resources. Within 4 months, we had a working prototype surgeons raved about. The morning of the quarterly board meeting, I was ready. I had my presentation, my solution, projected revenue recovery. But when I arrived at the boardroom, my father was already there, presenting my work. My slides, my research, my prototype in his hands. As I've been directing the team, he said smoothly, "We've developed a solution." I stood frozen in the doorway. Board members nodded appreciatively. Victor caught my eye, a slight frown, but said nothing. When my father finished, applause filled the room. "Audrey," he acknowledged, finally spotting me. "Nice of you to join us. Take a seat if you can find one." The only empty chair was in a corner, far from the table. I sat, a professional smile fixed on my face, while pure rage burned inside me. After the meeting, I confronted him in his office. "Those were my designs," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "My research, my prototype." He barely looked up. "You work for Lancaster Technologies. Everything you develop belongs to the company. To me. I deserve credit for my work." I finally raised my voice. He looked at me then, irritation clear. "You know what you deserve? To be grateful. I gave you any position here at all. Douglas would have solved the problem eventually." His face hardened. "Go back to your little projects, Audrey. The adults are running the business." The very next week, company-wide emails announced Douglas's promotion to Executive Vice President of Product Development, citing his innovative solution to the cardiovascular crisis. My name appeared nowhere. That night, Eleanor called me. "Are you sitting down?" she asked. "I was cleaning out some old storage files and found something you need to see. It's about your grandfather's will." We met at a coffee shop. Eleanor handed me a manila envelope. "These are copies," she said. "I put the originals back exactly where I found them." Inside was a draft of my grandfather's will, dated 2 months before his death. It explicitly stated that his controlling shares of Lancaster Technologies should be held in trust until I reached 30, then transferred directly to me. "This was never executed," I whispered, flipping through pages. "The will that went through probate left everything to my father." Eleanor nodded grimly. "There's more. Keep reading." The envelope also contained emails between my father and the family attorney, dated just days after Grandpa's death. They discussed modifications to the will before filing. He changed the will. My own father had disinherited me. "It appears so," Eleanor confirmed. "And there's something else. The company financial reports have inconsistencies. Small enough to miss, but they've been growing." The next day, I ran into Stephanie. She stopped me, her perfectly manicured hand on my arm. "Audrey, darling, we haven't had a proper chat in ages. Lunch this week." I agreed, curious. At a ridiculously expensive restaurant, she ordered a $100 bottle of wine before noon. "I worry about you," she cooed. "All work and no social life." At your age, I was already married. I set down my fork. "I'm focused on my career." "Yes, but is it making you happy? You keep pushing for recognition your father can't give you." "Can't," I asked, "or won't?" Her smile tightened. "Harold built this company into what it is today. It pains him to see you constantly challenging his decisions. Douglas knows how to support your father rather than compete with him." "Is that what you think I'm doing?" "Competing?" "Darling," she leaned forward, her voice dropping. We both know you've always wanted what Harold built. But some things aren't meant to be. Perhaps if you found fulfillment elsewhere, you wouldn't need to prove yourself here." In that moment, her mask slipped. I saw the pure, cold calculation, the protective mother ensuring her son's inheritance. I smiled pleasantly. "Thank you for your concern, Stephanie. I'll give it some thought." As we parted, she added, "Your father is under tremendous pressure. Try not to add to his burden with unrealistic expectations." That afternoon, I started compiling a list of allies. Division heads who'd praised my work. Engineers who respected my technical knowledge. Administrative staff who'd been there since my grandfather's time. I would need them all. My most surprising ally emerged 2 weeks later. Jackson Wright, recently hired to the legal department, questioned some contract language designed to obscure liability. We ended up working late, ordering takeout. "This isn't my first rodeo with vague safety language," he said, loosening his tie. "My last firm specialized in corporate malfeasance cases." "Defending corporations?" I asked. "Sometimes. Sometimes helping whistleblowers." He studied me. "The cardiovascular device modifications were yours, weren't they? Not Douglas's." I stiffened. "What makes you say that?" "The technical language. Douglas can barely explain how the devices work in layman's terms." I said nothing, but Jackson nodded, as if my silence confirmed everything. "Corporate families are complicated," he said. "I've seen how they can rot from the inside." Over the next several weeks, the financial patterns I'd noticed started to coalesce into something horrifying. Research funds allocated to projects that produced no results. Consulting fees to companies that seemed to exist only on paper. Offshore accounts receiving regular transfers for international market development in countries where we had no presence. Each discovery was a piece of a puzzle I wasn't yet ready to assemble. But the picture emerging looked increasingly like systematic fraud, with my father at its center. I needed more evidence before I could act. All the while, I continued producing exceptional work, building my reputation while appearing to accept my limited role. Douglas took credit for 2 more of my innovations. My father denied my request for a team. Stephanie hosted lavish parties where I was seated far from any networking opportunities. But I was patient. I was watching. The truth was coming into focus, one betrayal at a time. 6 months after my return, the company hosted its annual charity gala. Stephanie's pride and joy, a $500,000 spectacle for children's medical research. Executives, board members, major clients, local politicians. I wore a simple black gown, elegant but understated. Douglas arrived with a model whose name he kept forgetting. My father and Stephanie made their grand entrance 30 minutes late, ensuring all eyes were on them. From my table at the periphery, I watched the performance of the perfect family. "They do put on quite a show," Victor murmured beside me. He, too, was becoming marginalized for questioning my father. "The Lancaster legacy on full display," I replied, sipping champagne. "Not the full legacy," Victor said meaningfully. "Your grandfather would have handled things differently." Midway through dinner, I excused myself to the restroom. Taking a detour, I slipped into a service corridor and made my way to the hotel's business center. Using the access code Eleanor had provided, I logged into the Lancaster Technologies secure server. For 10 minutes, my hands trembled slightly as financial documents from restricted folders filled the screen. Company funds diverted through a complex web of subsidiaries. Research budgets manipulated. Tax documents altered. The irregularities I'd noticed were just the surface of a systematic fraud spanning years. As I was about to log out, I found one more folder labeled William Estate. Inside was the smoking gun, the original version of my grandfather's will, exactly as Eleanor had described, leaving controlling interest to me upon turning 30. Alongside it, documentation of how it had been altered after his death. I transferred everything to an encrypted drive and returned to the gala, my expression carefully neutral, despite the thundering of my heart. When Douglas drunkenly clinked his glass to make an impromptu speech about continuing the Lancaster legacy of innovation, I applauded politely, while mentally calculating how many federal laws my father had broken. The evening concluded with my father announcing a new children's hospital wing, named after Stephanie. The irony was unbearable. My mother had dedicated her life to those hospitals. Now Stephanie was literally putting her name on that legacy, too. As guests departed, my father summoned key executives to our home for nightcap strategy discussions. These after-parties were infamous for the real business decisions made over expensive scotch. For once, I was included, perhaps because excluding the only Lancaster actually present at the table would have seemed odd to the clients in attendance. Our family estate was lit up, cars pulling into the circular driveway. Staff took coats, served drinks. I watched my father hold court, board members and executives laughing at his jokes, seeking his approval. The power he wielded was intoxicating to them. Around midnight, as discussions broke into smaller groups, I made my way to my father's home office. I needed one final piece of evidence, bank statements showing personal benefit from the corporate fraud. I knew he kept hard copies in his desk, too cautious to leave everything in digital form. I was photographing documents with my phone when the door opened. My father stood there, glass of scotch in hand, his expression shifting from surprise to anger. "What are you doing in here?" he demanded. I straightened, my phone slipping into my pocket. "Looking for the Anderson proposal you mentioned earlier." "In my desk drawers, you said?" We stared at each other, the pretense between us finally dropping away. I thought of all the times I'd sought his approval, his recognition. All the brilliant work I'd done for his company. All the lies he had told. "I know about grandfather's will," I said quietly. "The real one." Color drained from his face. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "I know about the offshore accounts. The diverted research funds. The tax fraud." He set down his glass carefully. "You think you understand business at your age? Sometimes complex strategies look questionable to inexperienced eyes. Fraud looks like fraud to federal prosecutors." His expression hardened. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm telling you I know the truth about everything, including how you built your precious empire on stolen inheritance and criminal activity. You ungrateful little." He stopped himself, visibly bringing his anger under control. "Everything I did was to build this company. To create a legacy. A legacy you stole from me. You." He laughed harshly. "You could never handle what I've built. You're too much like your mother. Soft. Sentimental. This company needs a strong leader. Like Douglas? The alcoholic who takes credit for other people's work." His face flushed dark red. "At least he understands loyalty. Is that what you call it?" "I call it enabling criminal behavior." He stepped toward me, his voice dropping dangerously. "You will not threaten this family. Everything you have, I gave you." "No," I countered. "Everything I should have had, you took from me." Something snapped in his eyes. "You are nothing without the Lancaster name. Nothing." He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging painfully into my skin. I pulled away, but his rage was fully unleashed now. As I turned to leave, he shoved me hard toward the door. Instead of opening, the heavy wooden door held firm. My momentum carried me forward, and I crashed through the glass panel beside it. The sound was deafening. Sharp pain exploded across my back and arms as glass shattered around me. I landed hard on the hallway floor, stunned and disoriented. Warm wetness spread across my face. Blood. Silence fell as party guests turned to stare. Stephanie appeared in the doorway of the living room, hand flying to her mouth. Douglas stood behind her, eyes wide. My father stood frozen in the doorway, the realization of what he had done slowly dawning on his face. For a moment, he looked exactly like a frightened old man. All illusions of power stripped away by one act of violence. I touched my face, my fingers coming away red. Strangely calm, I looked up at him as blood trickled down my cheek. A slow smile spread across my lips. "You just lost everything," I whispered. Stephanie rushed forward, suddenly all concern for the watching guests. She tripped. She announced loudly, "Too much champagne. Let's get you cleaned up, Audrey." No one moved to help me stand. I rose slowly, glass tinkling from my dress, blood dripping onto the marble floor. Douglas stepped forward, perhaps to guide me away. But I shook my head. "Don't touch me," I said clearly. "None of you touch me." I walked straight through the crowd, head high, feeling the blood drying on my skin. Behind me, I heard my father instructing guests that the party was over. Stephanie's nervous laughter. Douglas offering to drive someone home. In my bathroom, I examined the damage. Dozens of small cuts covered my arms and back. A deeper gash ran along my hairline, accounting for most of the blood. As I carefully removed glass fragments and disinfected the wounds, I made my decision. Years of theft, fraud, lies, manipulation. All of it would end tonight. I had everything I needed now, including witnesses to my father's violence. The carefully constructed facade of Lancaster family perfection had shattered along with that glass door. By morning, the empire would follow. I didn't sleep that night. Pain from dozens of cuts kept me alert, but it was adrenaline and pure resolve that truly kept exhaustion at bay. After treating the worst of my injuries, I changed into practical clothes and began executing the plan I'd been mentally refining for months. First, I backed up all the evidence I'd gathered to 3 separate, secure locations. 1 cloud server, 1 physical drive hidden in my apartment, and 1 set of documents mailed to Jackson's personal address days earlier as insurance. If anything happened to me, instructions would ensure everything reached the proper authorities. As I worked, memories surfaced unbidden. My grandfather, showing me the first medical device he ever patented. My mother's gentle guidance. The moment I realized my father saw me as competition, rather than his daughter. The gradual erosion of my place in my own family. At 3 o'clock in the morning, my phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. "Are you all right?" Hearing concerning rumors about an incident at the gala. I responded briefly, "I am fine. Be ready tomorrow. Everything changes." She replied immediately, "Whatever you need." Eleanor had been loyal to my grandfather for 30 years. When he died, she stayed at Lancaster Technologies, partly out of loyalty to his memory and partly, I suspected, to keep an eye on my father. She had witnessed the gradual shift from patient-focused innovation to profit-driven shortcuts. I thought back to a conversation we'd had 6 months earlier, shortly after I returned. "Your grandfather had a saying," she'd told me. "Never mistake the name on the building for ownership of what happens inside it." What did he mean? I'd asked. Lancaster Technologies belongs to the patients whose lives depend on our products, to the employees who dedicate their careers to the mission, to the principles of innovation and integrity. She fixed me with a meaningful look. He didn't build this company for one person to treat as a personal kingdom. That conversation had stayed with me, reinforcing my growing suspicions. Now, as dawn approached, I gathered the final pieces of my plan. At 4:30 a.m., I called Victor. He answered on the second ring, his voice alert, despite the hour. "I saw what happened," he said without preamble. "Are you injured?" "Nothing serious, but I need to meet with you before the markets open. I've discovered significant irregularities in the company finances." "Criminal irregularities." There was a pause. "I've had concerns for some time. Your father has been blocking full financial reviews. I have the evidence. All of it." Another pause. "My home office. 6 a.m. Bring everything." Next, I contacted 3 other board members I believed would prioritize the company over loyalty to my father. Brief, careful messages requesting urgent meetings regarding material financial concerns. 2 responded immediately, agreeing to conference calls later that morning. At 5:15 a.m., I reached out to Jackson. Despite the hour, he answered promptly. "I need legal counsel," I said, unofficially, "before I take official action." "Is this about what I think it is?" "Yes. And more. There was an incident last night. I heard whispers." "How badly are you hurt?" "I'll live. Can you meet at my apartment in 30 minutes? It's secure, and I have what you might need." What Jackson had was experience with corporate whistleblower cases. Before joining Lancaster Technologies, he'd helped expose similar fraud at 2 other major companies. He'd been hired during a period when my father was traveling, his resume approved by the head of legal, who had since been pushed into early retirement. When I arrived at his apartment, he took one look at my face, the bandage at my hairline, and wordlessly poured me a cup of coffee. "Start from the beginning," he said, pulling out a legal pad. "Everything you found and everything that happened last night." For 45 minutes, I laid out the evidence, financial discrepancies, the altered will, the pattern of control and isolation, and finally, the violent culmination at the gala after-party. You have enough for the SEC, the IRS, and likely criminal charges, he confirmed, reviewing my documentation. But you need to consider what this means. Going public burns everything to the ground. The company's stock will plummet. Jobs could be lost. Your family name tarnished permanently. I've considered all of that, I replied. I also considered what happens if this continues. Patient safety compromised for profit. Employees working for a criminal enterprise without knowing. My grandfather's legacy corrupted beyond recognition. Jackson studied me. There's no halfway option here. Once you pull this trigger, you can't take it back. I know. And you're ready for the personal cost? Your father will likely face prison. Your relationship with your family destroyed forever. I touched the bandage on my forehead, feeling the sting of the cut beneath. That relationship was destroyed long ago. I just didn't want to admit it. Jackson nodded slowly. Then let's make sure this is done right. Maximum impact, minimum legal exposure for you. Together, we crafted communications for each recipient. The SEC would receive comprehensive financial records. The board members would get summary evidence and emergency protocols for company stabilization. Select journalists would receive carefully curated information packages, timed for release after official investigations began. What about your claim to controlling interest? Jackson asked. The altered will? One battle at a time, I said. First, we stop the criminal activity. Then we can address ownership through proper legal channels. By 9 a.m., I had met with Victor and one other board member, Patricia Alvarez. Both were ashen-faced after reviewing my evidence. We'll need to call an emergency board meeting, Victor said. Suspend Harold pending investigation. He'll fight it, Patricia warned. Let him, I replied. The evidence speaks for itself. At 10 a.m., I returned to my apartment to make final preparations. My phone had accumulated 23 missed calls from my father, 12 from Stephanie, and 9 from Douglas. I ignored them all. Instead, I called 3 journalists known for their thorough reporting on corporate malfeasance. Each conversation was brief, professional, and ended with a scheduled delivery of documentation later that day. As noon approached, I felt a moment of hesitation. Was I truly ready to destroy my family in such a public way? Then I remembered my grandfather's integrity, my mother's compassion, the values they had instilled in me that had been betrayed by my father's greed. I remembered the feeling of glass shattering against my skin. The look in my father's eyes, not of remorse, but of rage that I had provoked him into revealing his true nature. I made one final call to Eleanor. It's happening today, I told her. Be prepared for chaos. I've been prepared for years, she replied steadily. Your grandfather would be proud. At 12:30 p.m., I sent the first batch of evidence to the SEC through their whistleblower portal. At 12:45, I emailed comprehensive documentation to the 7 board members I trusted. At 1 p.m., I provided secure access to selected documents to the journalists. Then I waited, knowing the carefully constructed empire of lies was about to collapse. The first domino fell at 2:17 p.m. when I received a call from Victor. The SEC has contacted legal, he said without greeting. They're requesting all financial records be preserved immediately. Harold is being summoned to an emergency board meeting at 4. Has he responded? I asked. Not yet. His assistant says he's in meetings off-site. My father was likely in damage control mode, trying to identify the source of the leak. He wouldn't suspect me immediately, believing his display of power last night had put me in my place. Keep me informed, I said. And Victor, thank you for doing the right thing. This company was your grandfather's life's work, he replied. Someone needs to save it from your father. At 3:30 p.m., Jackson texted, Federal agents just entered the building. Executive floor in lockdown. Files being secured. Things were moving faster than anticipated. I'd expected at least a day before federal involvement became visible. Someone on the board must have made additional calls, perhaps to the FBI or Department of Justice. My phone rang again. Douglas. For the 10th time, I declined the call. By 4 p.m., I needed to retrieve the final pieces of evidence from my father's home. With everyone focused on the corporate headquarters, the family estate would likely be empty. I took a rideshare rather than my own car to avoid recognition and had the driver drop me 2 blocks away. The house was quiet as I approached. Staff would be minimal on a weekday afternoon. I used my key to enter through the side door near the kitchen, listening carefully for movement. Hearing nothing, I made my way to my father's home office. The glass door had been hastily boarded up with plywood. Dried blood still stained the marble floor where I had fallen. I stepped carefully around it and entered the office. My father's desk appeared untouched from the night before. I went directly to the hidden safe behind the hunting painting. Another of my grandfather's traditions my father had co-opted without understanding its significance. The combination was my grandfather's birthday, something my father had kept out of sentimentality or maybe just laziness. Inside the safe, I found what I was looking for, the original copy of my grandfather's will with handwritten notes from my father indicating changes to be made. Next to it sat a small leather journal my grandfather had kept, documenting his intentions for the company's succession. And beside that, account information for private offshore holdings where company funds had been diverted. I photographed everything, then carefully replaced the items, except for the journal, which I slipped into my bag. It wasn't technically evidence of crimes, but it was my birthright documentation of my grandfather's true wishes. As I closed the safe and replaced the painting, I heard a door close somewhere in the house. Footsteps approached down the hallway. I quickly moved behind the large desk, crouching out of sight. The office door opened. From my hiding place, I could see Douglas's expensive shoes step inside. He moved to the desk, began opening drawers, shuffling through papers. His movements were erratic, panicked. "Where is it?" he muttered. Where would he keep it? He was looking for something specific, incriminating evidence, most likely. My father must have sent him to clear out anything damaging before authorities thought to search the house. Douglas moved toward the safe. As he shifted the painting, I realized I needed to leave immediately. While he was distracted with the safe combination, I slowly edged toward the door, staying low behind furniture. I had almost reached the doorway when his phone rang, startling us both. I froze as he answered. "Yes, I'm here now," he said, his voice tense. "Looking exactly where you said." "No, I haven't found it yet." "They what? When?" His voice rose in alarm. "How many agents?" "Jesus." "Yes, I understand." He ended the call and slammed his fist against the wall. Damn it. Whatever he had just learned had clearly escalated the situation. As he turned back to the safe, I seized my opportunity and slipped out the door, staying close to the wall to avoid the creaking floorboards I remembered from childhood. I made it to the side door and out of the house without detection. Once clear of the property, I checked my phone. 5 missed calls from Eleanor and a text, "FBI at headquarters." Complete lockdown. Harold being questioned. It was happening even faster than I had anticipated. I called Eleanor from a coffee shop 2 miles from the estate. "What's the situation?" I asked when she answered. "Agents everywhere," she replied in a hushed voice. "They arrived with warrants for financial records going back 7 years. Harold is in the conference room with federal agents and company attorneys. Stephanie tried to leave the building but was escorted back inside. And the board emergency session in progress. Victor is leading. They're discussing a temporary leadership structure, pending investigation." I processed this information. "Where are you now?" "Records department. They've asked us to facilitate document access." "Stay safe," I told her. "This will get uglier before it improves." My next call was to Jackson. "I need to know if I should come in or stay away." "Stay away," he advised immediately. "The board knows you're the whistleblower, but it's better if you're not physically present while federal agents are conducting initial interviews. I've informed select agents that you're available to provide testimony when needed." "Has my father figured it out yet?" Jackson's voice was grim. "Yes. When agents mentioned the altered will, he apparently shouted something about you before his attorney shut him down. At 6 p.m., I checked into a hotel under a pseudonym, as Jackson had advised. From this secure location, I monitored developments through secure communications with my allies inside the company. The evening news ran the first stories. Federal investigation at Lancaster Technologies. Medical device giant facing fraud allegations. Lancaster CEO under investigation. None mentioned me specifically yet, but that would come. I had provided the journalists with enough background that the full story would emerge in waves, each more damaging than the last. At 9:12 p.m., my father finally called again. Against my better judgment, I answered. Why? His voice was hoarse, barely recognizable. You know why. Do you have any idea what you've done? The company won't survive this. The company will survive, without the fraud and corruption. He was silent for a moment. Then, with cold fury, you planned this. All of it. Coming back to the company, gaining access. I came back to save what grandfather built. I gave you chances to do the right thing. By destroying your own family? This company supports hundreds of employees. Patients depend on our products. Don't pretend this is about employees or patients. This is about what you stole from the company, from shareholders, from me. His voice turned pleading, a tone I had never heard from him before. Audrey, please. Whatever you think I've done, we can resolve this privately as a family. We stopped being a family the moment you decided I was a threat rather than your daughter. I paused, then added, or perhaps it was when you altered grandfather's will to disinherit me. Silence. You can't prove that. I already have. It's all in the hands of authorities now. I'll fight this, he growled, the brief vulnerability replaced by raw anger. With every resource I have. Those resources are being frozen as we speak. I ended the call and turned off my phone. The die was cast. My evidence was with the authorities, the board, and soon, the public. There was no stopping what would come next. At the hotel room desk, I opened my laptop and reviewed one final email. It contained my formal statement to the board, requesting emergency appointment as interim CEO based on my grandfather's documented intentions and my qualifications. Victor had helped draft it, believing the company needed a Lancaster at the helm to weather the coming storm, but one untainted by the scandal. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the send button. Once sent, I would be volunteering to step into the center of the hurricane, to take responsibility for saving a company on the verge of collapse, to face public scrutiny and potential backlash. I thought of my grandfather's words, business is about more than profit. It is about purpose. I pressed send. My hotel room phone rang at 5:30 a.m., jarring me from fitful sleep. It was Victor. Turn on the news, he said without preamble. I fumbled for the remote. A somber news anchor was mid-sentence. Federal agents executed search warrants at both Lancaster Technologies headquarters and the Lancaster family estate late into the night. Sources confirm CEO Harold Lancaster and CFO Martin Wells have been taken in for questioning. The screen showed footage of my father being escorted to a black SUV, his face ashen, Stephanie following behind with agents on either side. Douglas was notably absent. The board voted at 4 a.m. Victor continued. Harold has been suspended pending investigation. Wells terminated. Your appointment as interim CEO was approved by a narrow margin. I sat on the edge of the bed, stunned, despite having set these events in motion. When do they need me there? 9 a.m. board meeting to formalize the transition. Federal agents want to interview you at 11 o'clock. Press conference tentatively scheduled for 2 p.m. The machine was in motion now, unstoppable. I'll be there. After showering, I dressed with careful consideration, a conservative navy suit, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back to partially conceal the bandage on my forehead. I needed to project stability and confidence, not appear as either victim or vindictive daughter. On the drive to headquarters, my phone buzzed continuously. The story had broken wide open overnight. 3 major business publications had run detailed exposés on the financial fraud, citing anonymous whistleblowers and company insiders. One had directly referenced the altered will, though without naming me specifically. The Lancaster Technologies parking lot was filled with news vans and reporters. Security personnel escorted me through a side entrance to avoid the media gauntlet. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Employees gathered in small groups, conversations stopping abruptly as I passed. Eleanor met me at the executive elevator. They know it was you, she said quietly. Not officially, but word has spread. How are the employees taking it? Shocked, confused, afraid for their jobs, But also, she hesitated, there's relief among some. Your father's management style had become increasingly erratic. People have been walking on eggshells for months. The executive floor was eerily quiet. Federal agents had commandeered several offices, boxes of documents stacked in conference rooms. Victor waited for me in what had been my father's office, now stripped of personal items. The initial financial assessment is worse than we thought, he said after closing the door. The fraud extends beyond what even your evidence showed. Wells has apparently been cooperating with authorities since midnight, implicating your father in exchange for leniency. I nodded, unsurprised. And the company's status? Stock trading was halted before market open. We expect a 30 to 40% drop when it resumes. Major hospital chains are calling for reassurance about supply continuity. The FDA has requested emergency meetings regarding product safety. Any indication of actual safety issues? This was my greatest concern. Patient lives could be at risk. Initial review suggests the fraud was financial, not product-related. Your father may have been corrupt, but he wasn't stupid enough to risk liability for defective medical devices. Small comfort, but critical. We spent the next hour preparing for the board meeting, reviewing talking points and transition plans. At 8:45, my phone rang. Stephanie. Against my better judgment, I answered. How could you, she hissed, her voice raw with either tears or rage. Your own father. He made his choices, I replied evenly. Years of them. They arrested him in front of everyone. Do you have any idea what this is doing to Douglas? To me? Where is Douglas, by the way? I noticed he wasn't with you and father last night. A pause. He's dealing with this in his own way. Translation, likely drunk or hiding. Stephanie, I have a board meeting to attend. Was there something specific you needed? You will regret this, she said, her voice hardening. When the dust settles, you will have nothing and no one. Family is everything, Audrey. That's exactly why I did this. For my real family. For what they built and believed in. I ended the call as Victor signaled it was time for the board meeting. The boardroom was tense, divided between directors who had supported my appointment and those still loyal to my father. I entered with chin high, taking the seat at the head of the table that had been my father's for 2 decades. Good morning, I began calmly. I recognize this is an unprecedented situation for Lancaster Technologies. I want to assure each of you that my priority is stabilizing the company, cooperating fully with investigations, and ensuring continued production of the life-saving devices our patients depend on. For the next hour, we addressed immediate concerns, communication strategies, leadership transition, regulatory compliance. I outlined a 90-day stabilization plan, emphasizing transparency and accountability. By meeting's end, even the skeptical directors seemed cautiously supportive. At 11 a.m., I met with federal investigators. For 2 hours, I walked them through my evidence, answered questions about company operations, and formally filed my whistleblower statement. They were particularly interested in the altered will and my father's methods of concealing financial transactions. We'll need you to testify if this goes to trial, the lead investigator informed me. I understand, I replied. I'm prepared to do whatever is necessary. The press conference at 2 p.m. was a controlled spectacle. Standing at the podium with Victor and the board chairman flanking me, I faced dozens of cameras and reporters. Lancaster Technologies has a 50-year history of developing medical devices that save lives, I began. That mission remains unchanged. While we address serious allegations regarding financial improprieties under previous leadership, our commitment to patients, healthcare providers, and ethical business practices stands firm. I took no questions about my father specifically, deflecting to the ongoing investigation. When asked about my new role, I emphasized my qualifications and lifelong connection to the company's founding mission. As the press conference concluded, a reporter shouted, "Miss Lancaster, is it true you were physically assaulted by your father before reporting his crimes?" The room fell silent. The bandage on my forehead suddenly felt conspicuous. I maintained eye contact with the reporter. I will not be discussing family matters. This is about Lancaster Technologies, its employees, and the patients who depend on our products. Thank you. Back in the executive office, reports continued flooding in. The company stock had indeed plummeted 35% upon resuming trading. 3 executive vice presidents had resigned. Customers were demanding reassurances. Partners were invoking contract review clauses. Through it all, I maintained outward composure, making decisions, directing resources, projecting a confidence I did not entirely feel. By evening, patterns of support had emerged. Long-term employees rallied around the promise of renewed integrity. Industry partners who had known my grandfather expressed cautious optimism about my leadership. At 8 p.m., Eleanor brought me dinner at my desk and an update. Douglas has been located. He attempted to access sensitive servers before security removed him from the building. Jackson is handling the legal aspects. I nodded tiredly. Any word on my father? Released on bail, but restricted from entering company property. The family estate has been designated a secondary crime scene. He and Stephanie are staying at their lake house. And the employees? Eleanor's expression softened. Doing better than expected. There were initial shockwaves, but your afternoon address to staff helped considerably. People appreciate honesty after months of obvious gaslighting from leadership. Around 10 p.m., Jackson arrived with additional updates. The federal case is expanding. They found connections to tax evasion through the offshore accounts. The prosecutor is talking potential plea deals to avoid trial. Will he take one? I asked, knowing my father's pride. His attorneys will push for it. 15 to 20 years, potential sentencing otherwise. The reality of what I had set in motion hit me anew. My father, for all his flaws, facing prison in his 60s. A family shattered beyond repair. My own life forever altered. Having second thoughts? Jackson asked gently, reading my expression. No, I said after a moment. Just processing the scope of it all. For what it's worth, he offered, what you did took extraordinary courage. Many people suspected problems, but looked the other way for years. I thought of the glass shattering around me. The decades of manipulation and betrayal. The legacy nearly destroyed by greed. It wasn't courage, I replied. It was necessity. By midnight, I finally left headquarters for my hotel. Security concerns made returning to my apartment inadvisable for now. As the car pulled away from the building, I saw the illuminated Lancaster Technologies sign, my family name glowing against the night sky. For the first time in years, it felt like it truly belonged to me again. 6 months after the night my father pushed me through a glass door, I stood at the podium during our quarterly investor meeting. The boardroom was packed. Analysts and major shareholders eager to hear how Lancaster Technologies had weathered the storm. The past 2 quarters have shown remarkable resilience, I began, gesturing to the projection behind me. Stock values have recovered 60% from their low point. Our new ethical compliance framework has received industry recognition. Most importantly, not a single patient has experienced disruption in receiving our life-saving devices. The road to this moment had been arduous. The first month after the revelations had been chaos. 3 class action lawsuits from shareholders, FDA audits of all production facilities, employee uncertainty resulting in a 15% voluntary departure rate, media scrutiny that dissected every aspect of the Lancaster family drama. The criminal cases had progressed swiftly. Martin Wells, the former CFO, had accepted a plea deal in exchange for testimony. 3 other executives followed suit. My father initially vowed to fight all charges, but as evidence mounted and former allies abandoned him, his attorneys negotiated a complex agreement, guilty pleas to tax evasion and securities fraud in exchange for dismissal of more serious charges. He received a 7-year sentence, eligible for parole after 4. The financial penalties were severe. The family estate seized as partial restitution. I had not spoken to him since his sentencing hearing, where he had stared straight ahead, refusing to meet my eyes as I delivered my victim impact statement. Stephanie had filed for divorce 2 weeks after his conviction, negotiating her own settlement to avoid charges of complicity. She had moved to Arizona, launching a small skincare line that carefully avoided mentioning her Lancaster connection. Douglas had faced minor charges related to attempting to destroy evidence. He received probation and community service, then disappeared to Europe, occasionally appearing in social media posts from yacht parties and ski resorts, funded by whatever resources he had managed to hide before the collapse. The company transformation had been my primary focus. We had brought in forensic accountants to identify every financial irregularity, established new compliance protocols, restructured the board to include medical ethics experts and patient advocates, redirected research priorities back to innovation rather than cost-cutting. Most meaningfully, we had established the Grace Lancaster Foundation, named for my mother, dedicated to providing medical devices to underserved communities globally. It was what she would have wanted, what my grandfather had envisioned for the company's broader purpose. Moving forward, I continued, addressing the investors. We are launching 3 new product lines developed under our revised research protocols. Clinical trials show unprecedented effectiveness rates, and early adopter hospitals report significant improvement in patient outcomes. Victor, now chairman of the board, nodded approvingly from his seat. We had become partners in rebuilding, his institutional knowledge complementing my vision for the future. Eleanor had accepted a promotion to chief of staff, her loyalty finally properly rewarded. Jackson had remained with the company through the transition, then accepted a position with the Justice Department's corporate fraud division, though we maintained our friendship. Someone needs to catch the next Harold Lancaster before they do too much damage, he had explained. After the investor meeting, I returned to my office, now redesigned to remove all traces of my father's imposing dark wood and hunting trophies. The space was open with glass walls, symbolizing the transparency I had brought to the company culture. The physical scars from that night had healed, though a faint line remained at my hairline, visible when I wore my hair up. The emotional landscape was more complex. I had lost my family, but reclaimed my heritage. The company now truly reflected my grandfather's vision and my mother's values. That evening, I visited my mother's grave for the first time in years. My father had discouraged these visits, another way of diminishing her influence and memory. I placed white roses, her favorite, against the headstone. "I think you would be proud," I said quietly. "Not of the scandal or the pain, but of rebuilding something worthy of your name." The wind rustled through nearby trees, the only response, but somehow enough. My grandfather's journal had become a touchstone during difficult moments. One passage in particular had guided me through the darkest days of the transition. Business empires rise and fall, but integrity stands eternal. Lancaster Technologies must never value profit above purpose or power above people. If these principles are ever compromised, the company must be cleansed through truth, however painful that process may be. He had known, somehow, that such a moment might come. Perhaps he had seen tendencies in my father that concerned him, leading to his original intention to pass control directly to me. In the months since taking control, I had received hundreds of messages from employees sharing how the cultural transformation had affected them. Engineers now empowered to prioritize safety improvements. Sales representatives relieved to promote products they genuinely believed in. Manufacturing staff proud of new quality standards. These messages meant more than the financial recovery, more than the restored stock price or industry accolades. They represented the human impact of choosing truth over comfortable lies, of valuing integrity above family loyalty when that loyalty demanded moral compromise. The path forward remained challenging. Trust, once broken, rebuilds slowly. Some customers remained wary. Certain board members still questioned my experience. Media outlets occasionally revived the scandal for slow news days. But the foundation was solid, now built on truth rather than deception. The Lancaster name was being redefined, one decision, one product, one patient outcome at a time. In quiet moments, I sometimes wondered if my father ever reflected on what he had lost. Not just freedom or wealth, but the opportunity to be part of something genuinely meaningful. To contribute to a legacy greater than himself. To know the satisfaction of success achieved honorably. I had learned that some forms of betrayal cannot be forgiven, only accepted and moved beyond. That family is defined by values shared, not merely blood connection. That the hardest choices are often the most necessary ones. Most importantly, I had learned that we are not defined by what others believe we deserve, but by what we know to be right and have the courage to defend. If you've ever faced a moment where standing for truth meant losing something precious, I understand that struggle. Sometimes, the greatest victory comes after the most painful sacrifice. Have you experienced a situation where you had to choose integrity over comfort? Tell me what you think. I really want to know. Leave a comment below. And if this journey resonated with you, please subscribe for more real-life experiences of overcoming betrayal and finding strength in adversity. Thank you for listening, and remember, your worth is never determined by those who fail to see it.